Hola, me da mucho gusto darles la bienvenida a esta serie de webinars del IFEM. Soy María Fonseca Paredes, directora del Instituto de Familias Empresarias para México y Latinoamérica del Tecnológico de Monterrey. Muy buenas tardes. En el IFEM hemos diseñado esta serie de webinars, La Familia Empresaria como Factor de Éxito, y hoy arrancamos con el primero de ellos, Liderazgo en la Familia Empresaria. Y antes de presentarles a nuestro invitado, permítanme compartirles el porqué de estos webinars. Nuestro propósito en el IFEM es generar e integrar conocimiento, habilitar y acompañar a familias empresarias y sus líderes para que desarrollen competencias y provoquen una transformación que favorezca la generación de valor compartido y el florecimiento de la familia, la empresa y su entorno por generaciones. Por ello, esta serie de webinars está diseñada para impulsar el saber y la conciencia de una familia empresaria responsable acorde a nuestra metodología para el desarrollo de competencias que, como pueden observar, son gobierno y liderazgo, emprendimiento familiar, cultura intergeneracional, legado y patrimonio. Recuerden que pueden enviar sus preguntas haciendo clic en el botón Q&A que aparece en su pantalla y les iremos dando curso. También hemos habilitado la opción de interpretación simultánea que pueden elegir en el icono del mundo que aparece también abajo en su pantalla. En el IFEM nos preguntamos, ¿cómo promover un liderazgo familiar y empresarial que no solamente facilite la orquestación estratégica, sino también emocional? Y justo para hablar sobre esta noción de liderazgo es que hemos invitado a Justin Craig. Justin es profesor titular de emprendimiento y empresa familiar en Bond University, Australia. Es coautor del libro Leading a Family Business, Best Practices for Long Term Stewardship. También ha sido profesor internacional en Oregon State University, Northeastern University y profesor visitante en Kellogg School of Management de Northwestern University en Estados Unidos. Sus investigaciones han sido publicadas en los principales journals académicos de gran rigor. Justin Craig trabaja muy de cerca con líderes empresariales, sus asesores y consultores, y ayuda a desarrollar a otros miembros de la familia empresaria. Esta experiencia ha sido prácticamente en todos los sectores productivos y latitudes geográficas, incluyendo nuestro país. My dear Justin, amigo mío, it is my great honor to finally welcome to our community at Tec de Monterrey. The floor is all yours. Bienvenido, amigo mío.
Thank you, Maria. It is great to be with you on this platform. Unfortunately, not in person, but that will happen one day soon. Thanks for this opportunity to be with you. What I'll talk about in the next short while I have with you, some of the concepts that my colleague Ken Moores and I introduced in this book. But it's by no means a purpose for me to talk about the book in detail. But what this book is a business narrative. And what that means is that we created a leader of a business. We created a character. There are many books out there that give you an academic view of the space that we occupy as leaders, but we created a character. And the key thing that we established, we brought all of the theory-driven, evidence-based frameworks together in this character, built around the concept of a mindset and a skill set. Now, that may sound very academic at this point, but stay with me. What I consider, or what we consider in the role of a leader increasingly, is that by the time you get to a leadership position, I would argue that you are pretty well accomplished about how you do something. You're not necessarily understanding why you do that. So the leaders that I know, that I study, that I respect, at some point in time on their leadership trajectory, they start to move down this way. They start to question why things happen. They have mastered how to do the technical aspects of their position. But at some point in time, they move to being more curious. And that leads them to be, dare I say, more scholarly. They spend more time looking for frameworks to explain what it is that they do in more detail. So the other thing that I learned, and you are my teachers, let me stress that. The people on this call at the moment have taught me what I know. They have taught Maria what she knows. You teach the professors. That's something that we're forever indebted to you. What we also understand from observing and studying you is that the best leaders have a leadership philosophy, a philosophy of leadership. And that is idiosyncratic to your personality, to your situation, your own family. So think of that as you ponder the messages that I have today with you, is that what's my philosophy of leadership? And I give credit to my friend and colleague, Professor John Ward, who introduced me to that idea because he explained to me that the leaders that he respects the most have their own philosophy of leadership. Think about that as your take home, your first homework assignment. Our basic premise, what distinguishes you as a family business leader from others who are not leading family businesses, is that you have a dual logic. You have multiple responsibilities, that you have a social and economic logic, that your mindset is not only to deliver economic returns, but also to contribute to society. And that's important. If somebody suggests to you, straight out of our conversation right now, what's different about leading a family business? What is your leadership philosophy? Right straight away, you can say, we have social responsibilities as well as economic responsibilities. So that is ingrained in you. That is part of your mindset that we talk about in the book. The second thing that is captured in this mindset that I suggest you have is that you think in threes. You think in threes. You think about the business, you think about the ownership group, and you think about the family. You think about those concurrently. So you do not make decisions without having those three in focus the whole time. So what's good for the business needs to be good for the ownership group, which means it needs to be good for the family over the long term. And that is about managing a trilemma. If you ignore the business and only concentrate on the family and the ownership group, you will not sustain. If you ignore the family and only concentrate on the business and the owners, you will not sustain. So leading through here, you have that mindset builds these philosophies, your leadership philosophy and your organizational philosophy that is built around servant leadership, stewardship, trust, and dynamic capabilities. I'll talk to some of these today. The frameworks that we've developed that make these philosophies digestible are introduced in the book, and I'll also talk to two of those today, which then generates a skill set so you can govern, lead, innovate, and adapt. Now, that sounds quite complicated, I'm sure. Some of you on this call may thought, oh, this guy is talking hot air. Trust me, as a leader, you are a storyteller. And you have to tell your story to multiple audiences. The simplest way I know to tell a complex story is by using simple boxes and arrows. If you can walk away from this presentation and sit back at your whiteboard and understand this slide, replicate this slide to your own situation and the other slides that follow, you add your voice. And that's the role of a leader. Let me just add right now to put in some context. Leadership during this very, very complex period we're going through is tough, but it is also an opportunity. There is no better time to be a leader. I'll say it again. There's no better time to be a leader, because what has been thrown at you, what is being thrown at you right now is a whole lifetime full of challenges. A whole lifetime full of challenges. These are significant tests, as you no doubt are aware. For the now generation, those of you in the incumbent leadership position, this is a test that you've been prepared for the duration of your working life. For the next generation, this is an opportunity of a lifetime to show your mettle, to demonstrate that you run towards the action, not run away and hide. So twist it around as you think about leadership during these COVID-19 times. Think about it as an opportunity. Wow, this has been presented to me, and I need to make the most of this because, God willing, this is not going to happen again. So what's different? As leaders, you need to understand what is different about you being a leader of a business owning family or an enterprising family, whichever way you phrase it. This Venn diagram, or a variation of it, is probably familiar to many of you. I would encourage you to add your voice to it. I would encourage you to sit with it and understand the richness. Too many times in my experience, my observation, people look at this Venn diagram, this depiction, this figure, and say, oh, that just is the thing that we do as business owning families. Wrong. The richness of this, the complexity of this is masked by its simplicity. Let me elaborate. As I said before, you think in threes. You think as a family member, as an owner, and as a manager, managing on behalf of the family and owners. I took managers there, not business, because that is an individual, So I also want to talk about individuals. I don't necessarily talk about management, although some of you will be management, but the bulk of you will be managers, managing on behalf of the family and owners. The other way I like to look at this, and this is where your skill as a storyteller comes in, is that what happens if I go, family, we are family stewards, custodians, we are owner, stewards, or custodian, we are manager, stewards, or custodians. So you can give it additional richness to think about, not only are we a family member, we are stewards of this family. You can talk around the role of a leader being a family steward, a leader who is an owner steward, or a manager managing on behalf of the family and owners as manager stewards. To understand this difference, you need to understand that these are all in flux, that family evolves into a family of families. What started out as one nuclear family, the founder and his wife or his spouse or her spouse, has now had offspring, and you're starting to get a family of families. Think about that. It's dynamic. It's moving. Think about the ownership group that you have on that ownership, a continuum. Different types of owners. Some are passive down this end, and some are active or more active. Some are happy to be governing owners rather than operational owners. But what are they owners of? There are different types of shares. As a leader, you need to understand this. As you're preparing for leadership, you need to understand that that ownership group is increasingly complex. The thing that you may be interested in noting is that at one end, you have a heart, and at the other end, you have a dollar sign, which means, to tell the story, that some owners are there for the dividend, some owners are there for the emotional attachment. As a leader, you don't judge. This is tough. As a leader, you don't judge that your cousin is so focused on the dividend that he or she will get. That doesn't matter. That will change as they mature. It will. It doesn't matter that somebody is so emotionally attached. It's just as it is. So you start to consider, as a leader, I need to understand the complexity of the family. I need to understand the changing requirements of owners and that they are all different. And then, as in this circle, break it down and ask this question: if I'm managing on behalf of the owners, what am I managing? I'm managing a portfolio of businesses, the legacy business plus other associated investments. I'm managing potentially cash assets or liquid assets, philanthropic activities, real estate activities. So just like I suggested in the family, it is changing. The ownership is evolving. What you are actually managing is also evolving. So straight away, you start to think about, as a leader, this three-circle diagram helps me a lot. The other thing, if you are concentrated on leading a family enterprise, you should be concentrating on continuity. The word continuity. Forget the word succession. I'll say that again. Forget the word succession. Your role as a leader is to present or to leave this business, this portfolio of assets, this family, this ownership, better prepared for continuity. To do that, what you will need to do is to ensure that you relieve the tension between these systems. And the way you do that is by planning. You need 4 plans. I don't have the time to go through this at this point in time, but maybe we'll look at that later on. You start to think about, if I understand these 3 circles, I understand that there is going to be tension. Well, I'll also understand that to relieve that tension, I need a plan. To relieve that tension, I need a strategic plan. To relieve that tension, I'll need a family human resource development plan, and I'll need a governance plan to govern the family, to govern the owners, and govern the managers. This is what leaders do. But let me move to this. This is the chapter in the book that brings the 2 parts, the organizational part and the individual part together. This framework that I graphically depict here is the result of a book that was written by another mentor, friend, and colleague of mine, Professor Ken Moores, and his collaborator, Professor Mary Barrett. This is the richest of all frameworks. It's a 280-page book, and I turned it into something that looks like that. Because I suggest to you as leaders and storytellers that you will need to make the complex simple, to tell that story. And the simplest way to do that, or the most efficient way to do that, is being able to tell that story on a napkin or a coaster. Just like before, when I put up those 3 circles, you can draw that in a bar, at a wedding, in a banker's meeting. You will need to think about how you tell that story. The 4 L's does exactly this. It suggests that you, throughout your lifetime, evolve from learning business to learning our family business, to learning to lead, and then learning to let go. Learning business, learning our family business, learning to lead, and learning to let go. For the sake of this short time I have with you, I would like, if I may, to concentrate on this particular quadrant, learning our family business. Because if you are a future leader of your business, this is where you need to spend as much time. I would suggest also that while this quadrant is the most important quadrant, preparing you for leadership, this quadrant, learning to let go, is the most difficult. You won't get any argument from me that learning to let go is difficult. But I would suggest to you that you need to be prepared for that conversation. So learning our family business. Let me, if I can, make it simple. What I'd like you to be able to do is do exactly what I'm doing now. On a coaster, a napkin, a piece of paper, or a whiteboard. What I'd like you to do is to be able to do this. Understand that there are 4 phases. That you learn business, you learn our family business, you learn to lead our family business, and you learn to let go. In this quadrant here, you need to understand the value of values. The value of values. You need to keep the philosophies of the current generation and the previous generations, but not the detail, because you need to continue differently, continuing differently. what I want you to be able to understand, whether you are in the leadership position or at the moment, or have entering over into leadership, that what you will need to do in this quadrant is get profit responsibility. Profit responsibility. The other thing that you will need in this quadrant is to understand that this is where you solve the problem that many of you have related to imposter syndrome. Following a founder is difficult. Following a charismatic leader is different. It's natural that you will feel like an imposter, not prepared to take on this role. But the longer you spend in here and the longer that you hone your skills through this time that we're living at the moment, the better prepared you will be to lead. I will say that again. In this quadrant, this one here, you will need to know the value of values. You will need to keep the philosophies, but not the detail, in order to continue differently. And as a leader, start to think about the next generation, the generation is following you, that you will give them profit responsibility, because that's what you do as a leader, and that you will understand that there are challenges there that you will need to bide their time before they come in. Don't rush into the leadership quadrant because it is tough, because it is lonely. Prepare this generation, the next generation, for this role of leader. The other framework I'd like to leave you with today is this. And again, I was taught this by a family that I respect a lot, who spends a lot of time on this. This framework is a leader's friend. This framework, as this leader of this family business told me, 95% of my problems with my family went away when we populated this framework. That should be enough for you right now to say, I need to know more about this. It's simple. Again, the simplicity marks the complexity. The 4 R's stand for: you have a role, there is a requirement for that role, you have a responsibility, and you will be remunerated for that role. You have a role as a shareholder, a director, an executive or employee, and you have a family role. I want you, as homework for today, to map this out, to simply do what I did there. So you have a role there, you can do that easily. What is the requirement? You need to decide what that is. What is the requirement for that role? And you can decide whether that's a family member or spouses included, whatever that looks like. What I would like you to think is that these are all blank and you can populate that. This is the way to have difficult conversations, by starting with a blank canvas. Rub all these things out. And then you, with your stakeholders and you, the people that you lead, can start to have difficult conversations. Because what you will find is that you have a perspective on what it should look like, and that will differ from other people in your community. So let me just pause there if I can. I go back up here to Maria. I'm conscious of time, Maria, so I would like to get as many questions across as we possibly can. Can you just guide me here?
Sure. Well, so far we have some questions, and one is very direct in terms of, can you give some examples? I don't know when this person asked that question, but when you were describing the process. And the second question was posted as why do you prefer to use the word continuity as opposed to succession? I think that's
Okay. Okay, let me start with the second question first. And now's when I want these questions to start, because I can talk about frameworks all day long. But let's put the rubber to the road. Why do I talk about continuity rather than succession? The simple reason is that succession is misunderstood. Succession focuses typically on one person. Succession is a bigger topic. We need to expand the way we look at that. So what I mean by that is that succession is ongoing. Succession of not only the operational CEO, what about the succession of the board members? What about succession of the top management team? Think of it like this. Succession is an output of good governance. If we are having the right conversations in the right forums, one of those topics will be about succession. One of many topics. Succession comes under the category of risk. Are we exposed here because we have too much reliance on a particular individual? Yes. Are we exposed here because we have a senior management team that's aging and is about to retire? Yes. So succession is focusing on individuals, particularly in the family business space, on one individuals. So what I talk about increasingly now is that we've moved on from the succession plan generation. It was okay to talk about succession, but the current generation is more interested in continuity. I call them the continuity model generation. We're interested in how we're going to continue across generations. In a family enterprise, you work for your kids' kids. If you've got that mindset that you're working for your grandchildren, isn't it just natural that you're focusing on continuity constantly? I think it is. So start to think about that. You can apply your own narrative to that story, but think about that rather than succession. The other reason is succession is emotive. If you go to the incumbent now and say, we've got to talk about succession, Dad or Mum, the first thing they will say, you want to get rid of me. It is emotion. This is my life. Don't throw me onto the heap. I've got more to offer. True. So learn to let go. We need those skill sets. We need that reputational capital. So reposition it. Let's focus on continuity and legacy.
I love it. So let me ask you this, and maybe the first question I throw was this: how to understand the philosophy from one generation to the other, and not to get into details. Do you have any examples?
Sure. Again, you go back to that second L. Go back to the frameworks. If you own these frameworks, they will get you out of all sorts of trouble. Go back to that second L. We need to understand the value of values. This is our secret sauce. We need to understand it. This is distinguished. This is our resource that nobody else has. What are they? They're typically the values and beliefs of the founders that need to be interpreted by the next generation and institutionalized by the third generation and later generations. So thinking along those lines, start to think about value of values. That's different. But we're changing. So we've got to keep those philosophies and add our own spin to it. Keep the philosophies, not the detail. And then understanding that we need to continue differently. What got us here, Dad, is not going to get us to the next stage. That's something to consider. I'll give you an example. A family that I respect and know and work with in Japan, they looked at the 4 L's and the light came on. Here is a next generation leader in that second L as the incumbent leader, the now generation, is preparing to let go, moving into that 4th L. They looked at that And they understood, excuse me, that there's a different leadership style. The current leader, charismatic, grew the business, took it globally, etc., etc. The next generation, she has a whole different way of leading. She is a leader who brings community into it, shared responsibilities, distributes responsibilities, and brings that in. So it took them time, not only them to understand that the leadership styles are different, their philosophies of leadership, but for all the stakeholders also. But what also happened during that time is that the top leadership team were about to retire. They needed to bring in their new team. So for the next generation leader of the family, they needed to form their own team. And that takes time, because not only is it relevant to family members, but also for non-family executives working in the business. So think about your own time space. It's a 5 or a 10-year transition, and it takes that amount of time to build that confidence in the stakeholders.
Let me ask you this next question. How can we manage a small family business where the second generation doesn't have the technical and operational background, but more staff or administration roles, not technical, but managerial, let's say? How can an outsider role be managed in top management?
How can an outsider role be managed?
Like a non-family manager being on.
Okay. One of the things that a non-family manager, whether it's an executive or whether it's a non-family director, what they would like to see is that 4 R's matrix. Trust me, if you map out that matrix and say, this is how we distinguish our different roles, so that we have a role as an owner, we role as a director, role as an executive, role as a family member. They want to see processes in place that bring about transparency and accountability in the business. I'll say that again. They want to see transparency and accountability in the business decision making. Yes, there is overlap. So straight away, I would go to the 4 R's, populate that and say, well, executives understand that any family member needs the right experience, right qualifications. The other framework that you might be interested in looking at is the 3 circles. And understand there is going to be tension between the managers, whether they're family or non-family, and the owners. And to relieve that tension, we need a strategic plan. So what does that do? That gives us direction. What else does it do? And I just told you, it gives us transparency and accountability. So we need, it doesn't have to be a great big document. We just have to know where we are, where we're heading, and how we're going to get there. It's as simple as that. And if we have that shared vision of what we're trying to achieve, it's a lot easier to bring everybody along. But a part of that, the executive needs to contribute to the development of that strategic plan. I would suggest that will relieve some of that tension you're talking about.
Okay, so knowing that you like the why and how questions, here I have one for you, one more. Why do you describe letting go as the most difficult one, and how do you approach it?
Thank you. Why do I describe? It's and somebody, some of the earlier writers or scholars in this space, it's the final test of greatness. It's the most difficult because this business entity typically defines who you are as a leader. And by you letting go of that identity. There is a psychological detachment. Suddenly you move from being Victor Angelis, leader of the Angelis group of companies, to, wow, there goes old Victor. He used to run the family business. Now he's just Victor. So your identity is very much a part of that. So how do you plan? One of the ways you plan is use this word. It's inevitable. The word inevitable. David, you can come up with the translation to that. It's inevitable. Nobody lives forever. Entrepreneurs, by their nature, will say, when I die, not if I die. They just don't think it's going to happen. It's inevitable. The way that you plan for it is understanding that. The way you plan for that is think about your grandchildren. How do I want to be remembered? I want to be remembered as Granddad Victor. He planned. His gift to us was leading by leaving. I'll give you the best example I have. The Pope before this one. The Pope, yes, I'm talking about the guy at the Vatican. He led by leaving. Typically, popes stay too long. And if we had more time, I could give you other examples. They stay until their use-by date. Their effectiveness is not as it was because of age and because of changing demographics and all these other things. But the previous pope changed that model. He did what he came to do, and he led by leaving. Very, very insightful and impactful. He will be remembered for that. That's the way that the best leaders think. They think that I'm not going to be around forever. Things are changing. I've spent all this time preparing the next generation. I've got to move. But the other thing is that you've got to move to something that is meaningful. And that could be a role in administration. It could be a role in mentoring the next generation. And that's probably where I'd push you. Take on a role that you mentor the grandchildren about finance, about business, about life. Set the structures in place. Have ambassadorial roles. Manage real estate portfolios. Give yourself something meaningful to do, but get out of the road of the person that you've anointed to take the leadership role. It's difficult.
Sure it is. Here's one more question, and as I was reading it, I don't know if I'm going to be able to say it in the right way, but let's try. Sometimes when you add voice to the Venn diagrams, family circle gets bigger than the other two. Hence, family members have no order to interact with the company, and non-family management. What's your recommendation on, or comment on that?
My comment to that is that the best families are the greatest innovators. And what you probably think is I'm talking about innovation in products. No, the best families are the greatest innovators in their governance. Mm. They spend time thinking about governance and innovating and solving that problem. That problem may be that we're having issues because we've got to a size now where not too many people are engaged because they're not interested. We've got to find ways to engage them. What does that look like? We get very creative and very innovative. It may be that you said, well, they don't really care too much, so maybe we should buy their shares. Do it. Do it. Have a redemption policy. Say, listen, we're actually going to buy some of these shares back. If you want to cash in your shares, now's the time. Or we've got a way that you can trade your shares. Do it. It may be that we're starting to put some fun back into being involved in this. We need to get cousins together. We need to understand that it is the family that distinguishes us. We need to understand that you are family stewards, that you are owner stewards, that you are stewarding this asset, this beautiful treasure, and you are handing it on to this next generation. We need to put pride back into this brand, this family. How do we do that? We get innovative. We work with those people who want to actually do something about it. We get a small core of people, not necessarily those working in the business. We need to work with the married-ins. We need to have a big tent approach. And there's another slide there that I didn't talk to. Maybe the way is to say, let's take a big tent approach, that we're all involved in this tent. We're all there. Let me just put it up if I can. This is probably something that will be of interest to many of you there. Here's the answer to that question and many others. So yes, it's getting bigger, but we're going to take a big tent approach. We want people in the tent, and then we will create pathways for them to contribute in a meaningful way. But we will make sure that they're ready, they're willing, and they are able to contribute. Some of them want a job in the business. Not everybody. That doesn't make sense. We haven't got enough room in the business, and they're not capable anyway. Let's make it so some can work in governance, in business or family governance. If you want to be an entrepreneur, let the family be the funder, the venture capitalist. If you want to formalize our philanthropy, let's do that. Let's make a way that next generation members and their spouses, bloodline and spouses, because the spouses, the mothers and the fathers are the biggest influences of the next generation. So if we're serious about continuity, we've thrown out that succession word. If we're serious about continuity, let's create a big tent. I want people in the tent as a leader. I can actually observe them in the leader. They don't have to know every financial detail about our companies, but I can control them if they're in the tent. If my cousin Maria is typically seeing things different to me, at least if she's in the tent, we can have the conversation. If she's outside the tent, or Maria's husband is outside the tent, they are going to sabotage anything because they're curious to know what's happening in the tent. That's the way that I would start that conversation.
I love it. I've never seen this approach.
I've got plenty. I got more.
You're great. So we cannot finish this conversation, Justin, without asking you the following question. Based on your experience, and when you said the L quadrant related to learning to lead, you said you don't want to go there because it's solitary and it's a lonely place to be, but you have to lead, right? And how those leaders deal with the mission of leading and also managing the emotions, without saying that it's an easy or it's a simple question, but profound question, I believe.
It's a great question, and there's no answer. In Ken's work, when he studied, in that third quadrant, because he talked about paradoxes and priorities and pathways, there is no one answer, which led me to go and get wisdom from John Ward, who talked about a leadership philosophy. The best thing that you can do is understand, as Ken and Mary put it, this informal formality, that you are a servant leader. And there's the paradox, that you need to make tough decisions. You need to know that for every decision that you make, someone is going to be disenfranchised. Uncle Arthur is going to be disenfranchised because of something he didn't believe in. You put in structures to make sure there is a process to the decision making that goes on in the business, that you are, yes, accountable. One of the ways that I like to think about this, and that leaders assist themselves, and one thing that John Ward would tell you if you asked him, he would say, get independent directors on your board. Have people who you trust to help you with those decisions. Not that you trust, that everybody's trust. Surround yourself with good people. But ultimately, at the end of the day, many of these decisions are going to be yours. There's a beautiful article by Ivan Landsberg called The 4 Tests of a Prince. Maria, you might share that or give people access to that. That's another way to think about this conversation that we're having here. But as a leader, if you're there now and you're challenged with the leadership, see it as an opportunity. There's no one right way to answer these questions. Surround yourself with good people, follow a process, get informed opinion, and make sure that you're doing that and leaving footprints in the sand. As somebody who's coming through those L's, when you get that profit responsibility, with that comes leadership. Hone your skills in that second quadrant. Hone your skills, knowing that you will be leading one day. It's hard for the people who are there now, but if you're thinking that you're coming through there, look for opportunities that will hone, that will get you better in those situations, because those situations will happen in that third L. Look for those opportunities to be a better leader, to make some mistakes there. As you're coming through and preparing yourself for leadership. So although the third L, I don't deliberately avoid it, because I concentrate on the second L, and what should you be doing as a future leader is a lot of it happens in that second L.
Absolutely. Well, even though I said it was going to be almost my last question, I don't want to leave this one because it's from the audience, and maybe he or she is still there. And if you don't mind, I expect from you a short question, but in any case, and short answer, sorry. Do you think COVID-19 brought an increase of awareness on governance, and governance will determine the continuity of most of family enterprises?
Yes, 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 and yes. This is a test of your governance. This is a test of what you did, all of those hours that you spend putting those structures in place. This is a test of whether you've got the right people. And if you hadn't got the right people and you didn't pass those tests, learn from it. If you think there that you've populated your board with the Rotary Club members or granddad's golf buddies, wrong. You need people there who are going to give you tough love, who are really going to actually allow you to ask the tough questions. Think about that. If you didn't get it right, if you didn't pass the test during this time, start to think, well, I'm going to be ready. I learned from that. I need to make hard decisions when I'm forming my governance. I need to go with best practice. The companies that are, dare I say, sailing through this, even though their businesses are tanking, they have got the right people around the table. They have formed crisis management committees very early on. They have got external directors giving them viewpoints that they wouldn't otherwise have thought about it. So yes, it is a test of governance. Good question, good insight.